The checkout line at the grocery store moves slowly on a Tuesday morning in suburban Ohio. A woman in her mid-40s stares at her receipt. She hasn't bought anything extravagant. A carton of eggs, some ground beef, a bag of coffee. The total reads $74.38. She folds it in half without expression and walks out into the gray November air. She has been doing this calculation every week for 3 years, and every week the number is a little higher than she expected. This is not a story about a recession. Not exactly. The United States economy, by almost every official measure, is still growing. GDP expanded at a robust pace in 2025. The stock market periodically sets new records. And yet, from the parking lots of Walmart to the quiet offices of white-collar workers who haven't seen a job posting in months, something feels deeply wrong. The numbers say the engine is running, but the people inside the car can smell the smoke. What you are watching is the story of an economy that has split in two one half, gleaming in the data, the other half lived out at kitchen tables, and in the dull arithmetic of making it through the month. The gap between those two realities has just reached a level this country has not seen in 50 years. In April 2025, the Conference Board released its monthly Consumer Confidence Index. The reading came in at 86, the lowest since May of 2020, the month the American economy went into freefall at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. What made that number so striking was what was not happening around it. In 2020, 40 million people filed for unemployment in a matter of weeks. Businesses shuttered overnight. In the spring of 2025, none of that had occurred. GDP was growing. Layoffs were near historic lows. And yet Americans were just as pessimistic about their futures as they had been staring into the void of a global catastrophe. That disconnect between objective conditions and how people actually feel is the defining economic story of this moment. Understanding it requires going back to 2008. When the housing market collapsed that December, the entire construction industry essentially stopped building homes. For the next decade, housing starts never fully recovered. Builders had been burned, banks had tightened, a generation of workers who laid foundations and framed walls found other trades or left entirely. America stopped building at the exact moment it needed to build the most because 76 million baby boomers were aging out of large family homes, and 80 million millennials behind them were entering the life stage that requires somewhere to live. By 2025, the housing deficit stood at more than 4.7 million units. If you lined up every missing home side by side, the row would stretch from New York City to Los Angeles and halfway back. Between September 2023 and September 2025, housing costs rose more than 14%, nearly double the rate of wage growth. Young couples who were told to work hard and buy a house by 30 are renting apartments into their late 30s, not because they failed, but because the math no longer works. The old contract, save diligently, and the American middle class will catch you, has a hole in it, and the hole gets bigger every year. Into this already strained landscape came the tariffs. On April 2nd, 2025, a day the administration called Liberation Day, a sweeping set of new tariffs was announced on imported goods from dozens of countries. Inflation, which had been slowly falling since its post-pandemic peak of 9.1% in June 2022, reversed course. By September 2025, the Consumer Price Index was running at 3% annually, up from 2.3% before the tariffs hit. That sounds modest until you layer it on top of what already happened. Since January 2019, the CPI has risen 29% total. Median household income rose about 22% over the same period. That 7-point gap multiplied across every grocery run, utility bill, tank of gas, and month of rent for 6 years running is where the stress lives. The coffee on your kitchen counter is part of the story. In November 2025, coffee prices were up 19% from the year before. Beef was up 15%. Eggs were selling at prices 124% above their January 2019 level. A dozen eggs for $3.49 is not a crisis on its face, but it is one point in a constellation of data points that together describe a household budget getting tighter with every passing season, with no clear end in sight. And then there is the job market, where the story gets genuinely strange. In 2025, the United States added just 584,000 total jobs. 2 million were added in 2024. The last time job growth was this weak outside of a recession was 2003, in the long aftermath of the dot-com crash. As Heather Long, chief economist at Navy Federal Credit Union, put it in January 2026. The fact that 2025 was the weakest year for job gains outside a recession since 2003 is not going over well with the middle class. But here is what makes it confounding. Layoffs are also near historic lows. Unemployment sits at 4.4%. Companies are not firing people in large numbers. They are simply not hiring. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell described it himself as a low hire, low fire labor market. Workers who already have jobs hold on tightly. Workers who need a job, recent graduates, people who left during the pandemic, mid-career professionals laid off in the 2023 tech correction, find the door essentially closed. In white-collar sectors, entry-level roles have virtually vanished from job boards. Companies are holding off, partly due to economic uncertainty, and partly because they are trying to calculate how much of their workforce they will actually need once AI tools mature. Why hire a junior analyst if a large language model might do that work in 2 years? That calculation, multiplied across thousands of firms, creates a generation of young Americans who followed the expected path and are now living at home or working well below their qualification level, not because they failed, but because the door they expected to walk through is no longer there. The economy is expanding, but it is expanding at the top. Investments in software and AI accounted for half of all GDP growth in the first half of 2025, compared to just 10% in the first half of 2019. Analysts at Deutsche Bank suggested that without technology sector spending, the United States economy might already technically qualify as a recession. The AI boom is functioning as life support for the headline number, while the rest of the economy breathes unevenly. The people feeling this most acutely are not who the conventional wisdom would predict. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Survey found in late 2025 that the steepest confidence decline was among households earning more than $125,000 per year, and among Americans aged 35 to 55. These are not people in poverty. They are people who bought homes at 2021 peak prices with 3% mortgages, whose children are in college at costs that have risen 40% in a decade, who carry student loan balances into middle age and are now running spreadsheets at the kitchen table, trying to understand how they ended up feeling precarious when they technically did everything right. Moody's Analytics chief economist Mark Zandi said in late 2025 that nothing else could go wrong, like nothing, for the country to avoid a recession in 2026. Moody's puts the probability at 42%. In a healthy economy, that number sits around 15. The gap between those figures is the accumulated weight of the past 3 years. The frozen hiring, elevated prices, rising delinquencies, and an exhausted consumer who has been spending down savings for longer than anyone expected. Credit card delinquency rates are climbing. Auto loan delinquencies are climbing. The housing market has entered what analysts call a deep freeze. Sellers who locked in 3% mortgages in 2020 and 2021 won't list their homes because doing so means buying again at 6.5 or 7%, effectively doubling or tripling the monthly payment. That lock-in effect has choked off existing inventory. The only new supply coming online is expensive new construction, which is getting more expensive because tariffs on lumber, steel, and aluminum are raising building costs at the exact moment the country most desperately needs to lower them. The Center for American Progress estimated that tariff-related cost increases could result in 450,000 fewer homes built between now and 2030. The circular logic of this affordability crisis is what makes it so difficult to escape. Prices are high because supply is short. Supply is short because building is expensive. Building is expensive partly because of the same trade policies designed to make America more self-sufficient. Each force reinforces the others, and the people caught in the middle trying to rent, trying to buy, trying to save have very few levers to pull. The American economy is not collapsing. It is doing something harder to diagnose, growing in ways that leave large numbers of ordinary people behind, while asking those people to believe the growth is for them. The stock market sets a record. The hedge fund's quarterly return is superb, and the price of a dozen eggs is 124% higher than it was 6 years ago. The woman with the grocery receipt in Ohio folds it into her purse. She drives a reliable car to a well-lit store in a town with good schools. Her roof doesn't leak. Her children are healthy. She is, by any global standard, extraordinarily fortunate, and she knows this. She holds that knowledge and the receipt at the same time, and the distance between them is the distance this story has been trying to measure. The confidence indices, the hiring rates, the inflation data, the deficit projections. These are not abstractions. They are the aggregate of millions of moments like hers. millions of receipts folded in half, millions of job applications that generate auto-replies, millions of people doing the math quietly in parking lots and in the blue light of phones at 2 in the morning, recalculating a future that keeps requiring recalculation. Whether this moment resolves or deepens depends on choices about what to build, for whom, and whether the promise at the center of the American experiment is something the country still believes in enough to do the unglamorous work of making true. The checkout line moves, the receipt gets folded, and the answer is still being written.